As you can see, I've put this large warning here that this module is critical for the rest of the course. Everything in this module is going to serve as a foundation for the rest of the course. So if you don't understand anything in this module, make sure you get some help. Make sure you talk to me if you need to. It will make the rest of your time in this class easier if you master everything in this one. There are a few fundamental questions that will motivate what we cover in this module. The first is, what factors affect buyers' demands for goods? We also want to know what factors affect sellers' supply of goods. We also want to know how supply and demand interact to determine the price of a good and the quantity sold. And finally, we want to know, how does changing demand and supply affect the market prices and quantities of a good? To address this, we need to define some terms. The first is a market. Intuitively, you probably know what a market is. And it's simply a group of sellers and buyers. Within a market, we have a competitive market. And a competitive market is a special case of a market. A competitive market is also a group of buyers and sellers, but one where there are many buyers and sellers, such that any buyer or seller has a negligible effect on the price. And then finally, we have a third classification of market, which is a perfectly competitive market. So a perfectly competitive market is characterized by two characteristics. The first is that all goods in this market are the same. So you can think of these as commodity items. Let's say nails from the hardware store, right? They're basically all the same. You don't really care what brand the nails are. Any kind of agricultural commodity, corn, soybeans. And the second condition of a perfectly competitive market is that there are so many buyers and sellers that no one buyer or seller can affect the market price at all. So in this case, when the buyer or sellers can't influence price at all, we say they are price takers. And pay attention to the nuance, right? In the competitive market, buyers and sellers had a negligible effect, a little bit of effect still, but in the perfectly competitive market, there's no effect on price. And throughout this chapter, we're going to assume that markets are perfectly competitive. So we have alluded to the fact that we're going to be studying supply and demand. And so we need to define some terms related to demand. The first is quantity demanded. And the quantity demanded is the amount of the good that buyers are willing and able to purchase. Related to this is what is called the law of demand. And the law of demand says something very intuitive. It says when the price goes up, then the quantity purchased goes down. So more specifically, it's the claim that the quantity demanded of a good falls when the price of a good rises. This should be very intuitive. Just think about your own behavior. If something is more expensive, you tend to buy less of it. And when things are cheaper, you tend to buy more of them. Now, let's consider an individual, Pat Mad Dog Smythe. And Pat Mad Dog Smythe enjoys drinking coffee. And what we can do is plot out how much coffee Pat buys at different price points. So at $0, let's say they buy 16 coffees, a real Mad Dog. And then when the price goes to $1, maybe only 14, 2, 12, 3, 10. Let's go $4, $5, and $6, and say buys 8, 6, and 4. And so this table that we just drew, right, that relates price to the quantity demanded is called a demand schedule. Which is just that. It tells you what the quantity demanded is at different price points. And notice that the demand schedule obeys the law of demand. As prices are increasing, the quantity demanded is decreasing. So like most things in economics, we can put it on a graph. So we have price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis, and we can just plot these points. So at $0, Pat Mad Dog Smythe is going to purchase 16 coffees. At $1, they're going to purchase 14, 2, and 12. So we can connect all these points, and this resulting line is a demand curve. Even though it's not curved, sometimes it is curved, so we still call it a demand curve. And the demand curve is just a way to graphically show the relationship between price and quantity. For an individual. Now, in reality, there's not just one person buying and demanding coffee. We have multiple buyers of coffee in one market. And so if we add another individual to this demand schedule, about Rex, and let's say Rex has half as much coffee as Pat, right? Rex is not a mad dog. These two individual demand schedules for each individual, if you sum them up, you get the market demand. And so the market demand is the sum of all individual demand schedules. Graphically, we can plot both of their demand curves. So in red, we have Pat, Mad Dog, Smythe, and Rex in blue. And the market demand is going to be the sum, right, of the quantities, which means you take at each point, so you take 8 and 16 and add them together, which takes you out to 24, and 6 and 14, which takes you out to 21. And so the market demand is going to be a parallel shift that's the sum of all the individual demands. So that's it for this video. Next time we'll talk about what things influence these demand curves and how they change.